You are now listening to Out of the Blank.
Well, welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Chris. Now, is it Coplien?
Coplien.
Coplien. So, Chris, tell me a little bit about yourself and what do you do professionally?
So I'm 34. That's my dog. I'm 34. I live in the Jacksonville area of Florida, and I'm currently in the United States Navy.
So, what do you do in the Navy?
Master at Arms. I do security.
Whoa, we are Master Arms now. Is this where we get to let you hold all the guns?
I mean, I get to hold some of the guns.
More than the average Navy person would, I guess.
Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. You know, we're the people at the gates, checking IDs. We're the people driving around the base in case, anything happens on base, stuff like that. And, there are situations where we get to hold a little bit bigger guns than what we normally do. That's not too common, though.
Now,
not terribly common.
Is this something you wanted to do just like as a kid? You wanted to kind of join the Navy, or did you just see it as an option just because had so many benefits to it?
It's more of an option. I joined back in 2003. So it was more of an option to, get out of the house. The college I wanted to go to didn't accept my application, and with good reason, because I had terrible grades. And I just kind of wanted to get out and do my own thing. So one of my friends, his name's Brenton, but he came up to me and he was like, "Hey man, join the Navy." And I was like, let's go down to the recruiter and see what we're going to do. And here I am 16 years later, still in. And out of all my friends in high school, I think I'm the only one still left. But that's just kind of how it happened.
What have you learned kind of in your years, just the 16 years you've been involved in there?
I don't know. Just keep going. A job's good, man. Travel's good. Do what you're supposed to do. Work your hardest, and don't let opportunities pass you by, I guess. I mean, there's just so many awesome things I've done, so many awesome people I've worked with, the community, the culture. It's something, I don't want to call it a unique opportunity because obviously I haven't worked my adult life outside of the Navy. So, but, a lot of people say it is a unique opportunity. I guess I'm going to find that out in a few years when I get out.
Especially, you said exploring the world a little bit. So where have you traveled?
Where haven't I traveled pretty much at this point? I've been to Europe. I've seen a lot of Italy. I've seen Germany. Been to the Middle East, like Bahrain and parts of the UAE, and just general stuff. Been to Japan, not the mainland, but been to Okinawa for a little while. So I've been a little bit everywhere.
Now, so I'm fascinated to kind of wonder this. Now, are people kind of a little bit different there than they are here? I know that sounds like a stupid thing to ask, but I work with foreign exchange students that come down here on their visa, and they work here for the summer, and they always say that like America is a little bit different, and they ask obviously in many different ways, but when it comes to the people, they seem like they're not as connected to each other as they're supposed to be. They seem like they would call it two-faced, more like they're going to ask you how your day is, but they actually truly don't care. And I started realizing like we compare ourselves constantly, like, oh, the great US of A to Mexico, to all these other places that are more impoverished because they look at wealth. But I think they're richer in something completely different, and that comes to their culture. They're more connected as family members. They're more connected to the individuals in their community, which I think we seem to have lost.
I think it varies. I mean, you have a lot of different culture within America itself. I mean, I grew up outside Chicago as a kid. And the culture outside Chicago, like in the suburbs of Chicago, is different than what it is in Florida. It's different than what it is in New York City. It's different than what it is, just in rural areas. I mean, there's so many different cultures in the United States itself. And even when you start talking about different countries, you have different cultures. And I mean, that even goes for different areas of other countries as well. Like I've worked with Brits and and the Welsh and Scottish people, and they're all different in their own ways. There's just so many different idiosyncrasies between every culture and how they operate and just how they act. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's through the lens of wealth necessarily, because other nations do have wealth as well. Like you look at Europe and you see the Scandinavian countries, and they have quite a bit of wealth. So I don't know how they necessarily act on a day-to-day basis. I haven't been there, but I think that's too general of a statement to say that Americans are two-faced or fake or not genuine, and that's an American thing, and it may just be more of a where they're going into America thing. And I think that those kind of things you're going to see at different parts of the world too, but they're each going to have their slight differences.
I think it's the fact that we're just not really connected as people anymore. I wouldn't say that everybody is like, I wouldn't say it's just America that's two-faced. I think it's in every country, but I feel like where we've kind of had the benefit of the doubt when it comes to technology and the amount of innovation that we have here, just when it comes to the brand new things being created, we're the first ones that kind of spark that creativity. When you look at another country or another super massively developed country such as China, they're not as connected to people anymore because there's so many of them there. I mean, the fact that you can, like if a Chinese person or something bumps into you in a grocery store and they don't have to apologize, because that's not something they have to do there, because they learn that you are supposed to, like if you bump into somebody in China, somewhere that's heavily populated, you don't have to say sorry. You move things out of your way. They're all just like a school of fish. They're just constantly surrounded by each other. So they don't know the manners of, oh, I'm sorry. We're seeing that kind of today. I mean, at least when I go to the store or something, kids will bump into people and it's not them. They just haven't been taught that. They just haven't been known to respect that. It's like, oh, you just got to get what you're doing and like not really care about the other individual. And when you go to another country such as Russia or Bulgaria, Serbia, all these other places that are kind of experiencing some type of, impoverished country a little bit, and tough weather conditions too, they're more connected when it comes to the community and just overall value of what they consider connection.
Would you say that's something different? First of all, have you been to these other areas in other countries?
No, but I've actually that's just from my experience with the kids that like are from there, like from Serbia, Ukraine, basically all over Europe. We get the whole batch of them from the hotel, and they just sit there and they tell me like it's very, very difficult. Like I remember one kid at my work, his name's Andrew, but he like would share his coffee with you, like his open coffee. Like what the hell? Like he would, and people thought it was weird and thought he was like they call him mentally challenged, and he's not. And I was talking to him because I took psychology, so I ended up getting fascinated with the human mind, and I started learning like that might be something from his environmental influence or something that impacted him as a child. So I walked up to him. I was like, I know why you share coffee. And he goes, why? And I'm like, because you come from a family that probably had nothing and you learned to share. Am I right? And he said, yeah, that's exactly what. He goes, I believe that anything that I own, if someone else wants a piece of it, like type of like a communism type thing. And I heard that and I was like, I understand it. But I tried to tell him like people here see that as very different and very weird, because I don't think we're as open as we want to be. That doesn't mean you have to go and share your Starbucks Frappuccino, but we kind of lost the aspect of what it means to, you see it like nowadays, people becoming more sensitive. Okay. Like a joke gets played, someone takes it too far out of hand. I think it's because along the way, we forgot the line for what is being too sensitive and what's just being correct. It seems like we lost that connection and we're trying to make up for it, but by trying to be as sensitive as possible. When you start to take a joke and start to get the real seriousness effect of it, like it really kind of, it's hard to judge that line, I guess.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I can kind of see what you're talking about in countries that, I wouldn't say countries, but areas, right, where things are really run down. And like I said, because you go to different countries, and different countries, of course, they have different standards of wealth, different standards of experiences. And do I think that in America, we don't have that as much? I think so. And I think that's just because, one is just because our culture has just become so much more fragmented, right? in how we operate and how we talk to each other. And you could look a lot to that for cell phones. Like we have to do a lot of research at work about this newer generation coming up, and they're just very, very detached. They don't get out. They don't talk to each other as much. And we were looking at statistics like people stay in their house. It's becoming more and more often that people stay in their house and don't go out and party at an older and older rate. Like your typical 14-year-old or 15-year-old, and even some cases 16-year-old may have never left their house before.
It's funny because people chalk that up to video games, and it's actually not video games. It's the aspect that like you'll have full on plans to go do something, and then as soon as you get right through the door, all you want to do is go upstairs, lie down, and watch Netflix. You don't want to do anything else.
Yeah. Well, that, and why are you going to have a conversation with somebody nowadays when you can just log on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, and you have everyone at your fingertips right there. You can check everyone's statuses, you can see how everyone's doing, and that's how people are communicating. When you walk up and you're going to talk to somebody, what's the point of really talking to them? You already know everything that's going on in their day for the most part. You know kind of what's going on.
It's mostly like you're getting kind of like a bunch of complaints at once. You're not really getting the true aspect of it. Because I feel like when someone bitches or complains about something on Facebook, Instagram, social media, it gives them that like, it gives them that acceptance, but it's not a true connection like you would if you sat down with your parents or sat down with a close friend and gave it to them. You get more of an impact talking to one person that really means something to you rather than talking to millions of people. Because when you do it on social media, that number keeps going up and up and up.
Oh yeah. And each individual person means less and less. It's harder and harder to have significant close friends when you have so many friends, right? Especially when you prioritize having so many more friends than close interpersonal relationships.
I feel like, as you being a father, how have you seen so what are your kids' ages?
13 and 11.
So you've kind of seen the grasp of where technology is going. You understand, because I think a lot of people are like my parents and my grandparents. They don't realize how big technology has changed and how it's affecting the lives of the kids coming up. Like these kids nowadays don't know what it was like to not have a cell phone, to not know what 5G internet was, to not know what Wi-Fi, all these things were.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is where I talk about like they're getting extreme anxiety nowadays from, at younger and younger ages. You're hearing a 6-year-old and 8-year-old complain about having severe depression. And someone of older age would hear that and be like, you don't even know what severe depression is. And that's not true because they're getting so much information now. They literally have an open source to all these different connections, all these different articles, and half the time it's just bad news that's put on the internet. And they're constantly seeing that as soon as they wake up in the morning, and they're getting 10, 20 articles every single time they pull up the internet on their phone.
So you're saying just because they're getting the articles, it's somehow leading to just a different kind of emotional climate for them, and just the flow of information is what the cause of it is?
I definitely think if I was a kid and before I went to school, if I had a cell phone that I could easily click on the internet and see that, oh, this happened. Oh, there was this riot. Oh, this person got shot. Oh, this person got killed. It'd be like if I just woke up in the morning before school and just watched the news and just listened to every single bad article that went on.
Mm-hmm.
I would end up going into the day having more of a kind of downward view on what the world is. After a while, I would start to think the world is just crap and there's no point in even experiencing anything. I think that's what pushes a lot of kids to just go home and play Fortnite and play these types of video games because they want an escape from this reality that seems like it's crueler than it actually is. The problem is with media, I'm sure you can agree to this too, it just gives everything that's been happening for years a bigger platform. Before there was always murder, there was always rape, there was always all these things. Now we have these sources of information that feed us these 50 times in 2 hours. They're feeding you 50 different articles about a murder, about a shooting, about something like this. I'm like, it's not positive encouragement. It's not any positive energy at all. It's more just negative influence. They're going to sit there and keep telling you what's going on because it gets views. You want to be aware as a person what's going on around you. But I think the factor is we're not doing it correctly. You know what I mean? You're just feeding people bad information, which gives them a horrible outlook on the world. It's called mean world syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it goes back to the theory that if it bleeds, it leads, right? That's something that has always been in media. As long as it's gone, you don't necessarily see good news in media because good news doesn't sell. It doesn't lead. It doesn't. It just doesn't provide any. You know what I'm saying? No one wants to tune in to say how happy someone was. Maybe every once in a while if you really get down to the dumps about it. But yeah, that's why you're going to get stuff in the media all the time, which is exceedingly negative. And now you're right. I mean, people have a lot of access to that stuff all the time, so there is a lot of negativity. But at the same time, people aren't reading that for news sources as much. I think they're getting most of their news off Twitter. And I'm not really active on Twitter. I don't know how active you are on Twitter, but like I read some of the stuff on there, and it's just people always trash talking and shit posting each other.
Yeah,
And,
I don't have a Twitter for that specific reason.
right.
There are people doing one-line jokes, or they're doing something where it's just complaining about something. And it literally was like when Facebook first started, everybody was just bitching about their day. And it's
Mhm.
like it's hard because when you have something like that is literally seen as an outlet just to complain, it makes you not want to steer towards it. But I feel like this is what made my theory on why reality television was so popular. Now, when they create that conflict, that's all fake. It seems like it's a stage fight. I
Mhm.
think it's because the reason why reality TV was so popular back in the day was because people weren't experiencing conflict a lot in their everyday life. You would have a regular day, nothing bad would happen, and then you'd come home and then you turn on Jersey Shore. You were looking for that conflict. I
Yeah.
feel like constantly as humans, we've constantly had this need for conflict. And nowadays, we're getting so much of it now that it's too much for us to process. Like when you run into someone just on the street, you ask how their day's going, and they just start complaining about everything to the point where you're like, whoa, I just said, hey, like, how's your day going? Some chit chat, weather or something. Next thing you know, you're complaining about how you don't have this, how you don't have that. And it's like, too much, too much.
Because you didn't really want to hear what they said, that you really didn't care how they're really doing. You just were expecting, yeah, I'm doing all right, man, how about you? Like we all kind of react like how our old mindsets are. So when people do that, it goes back to what you were saying. Like Americans, they ask how you're doing, but we don't really care how you're doing, right? I'm not going to say this is for other I mean, people from all over the world do it. We're more doing it as a courtesy. So like you give a perfect example. Like we don't want to hear what's going on in your head all the time necessarily, unless people keep probing and asking, of course, because you do have those people that are genuinely interested. I won't say concerned, because you will have people who are concerned, but I think more people just genuinely interested.
If I like the best part or the best compliment I think I've ever gotten from the kids that are from these other countries that are at my hotel was they're like, I know you're real. And I'm like, what do you mean real? They're like, when you ask me how my day is going, you truly care. I was like, yeah, because I don't want to dive into something like if I'm not interested in it. You know what I mean? I'm not going to sit there and ask you knowing that you could literally not say, oh, it's going good. How about yourself? That you're literally going to give me a speech of why your life is sucking right now. I buckle up and I get ready for that ride, knowing that that's a possibility that might happen.
Mhm.
Nowadays people just put in headphones and they just choose to walk past one another.
Mhm.
And I'm like,
Well,
I get it. Okay. I always go to checkout, self checkout myself because I don't want to talk to anybody. Okay. I
mhm.
don't want, when I'm buying cabbage, when I'm buying corn, I don't feel like associating with somebody. And sometimes I do choose to go to regular checkout. And then I sit there and go, hey, how you doing? Create the awkward small talk. And next thing I know, I'm getting, oh, you want to know how I'm doing? I'm like, I don't know. I'm afraid at this point. I feel like I'm on the ledge and I have there's no way I can turn back now.
And see, that's really interesting too, because I mean, you're a podcaster, and one of the ways how you got us, how you got me on this podcast is you reached out to our podcast page and said, "Hey, do you guys want to be on?" And you're engaged in conversation, which is really cool. Even though you say you try to avoid that, I more try to avoid the only time I really use the self checkout line is if like I have one or two items. But on base, like we have the commissary, right? And the reason I use self checkout at the base at the commissary isn't necessarily for conversation, right? It's because they don't pay the baggers. The baggers only work for tips. So if I go through that line, I'm encouraging them to continue to do the process that they do. But I'd rather just have them pay the beggars, you know what I'm saying? But that's why I use the self checkout there. Kind of a little bit of a tangent, but
Well, you pay it forward. That's the best part I think about some people. I mean, how many times have you been to a fast food place and you hear the guy go, oh, your order was paid for by the person in front of you. You're
Mhm.
like, well, shit. Like you can choose to keep letting that go on down the line. Like you could pay it forward for somebody else and have that keep going. It could be a never ending chain, but it doesn't matter. That one thing made your day a million times better.
Mhm.
At least you got free food. It might just stick in your head for 10 minutes after that, but you still kind of remember it. The crazy thing is, I love people to death, but I really don't, on the same concept of we're not displaying our true selves anymore. It's easier to podcast or have a conversation with someone and truly be free behind a screen.
Mhm.
Not sitting in front of someone. You feel like there's certain things you cannot bring up, and there's certain things you don't want to say because you're afraid of someone listening to it and hearing something. I tell people, be as real as you want on my podcast. I don't want the fake conversation. Okay, honestly, I don't. The reason I don't like associating with people outside is because everyone's just displaying a mask. Everyone's giving me this false perception of who they truly are. And then when I get them to kind of lower it, they start to get interested into stuff they're interested in, such as like my buddy who builds IKEA furniture, or just some person that used to be a professional women's champion arm wrestler. And the list goes on and on and on of the people I've talked to. And that's what I see in people that is so deep down in their core that I know we all have, which makes me just want to ask, hey, you want to get on this podcast? It's for everyone. Let's just have a conversation, because it gives you that chance to show it and open it and realize you shouldn't be afraid of that. You shouldn't try and hide that. You should express that more often, because that's your true individuality showing. The thing that, is not the gym that works 9 to 5. It's so hard to fall into this comfortability and this safe zone of just keeping your head down and flying under the radar. We're meant for so much more in so many different ways, which I just wanted to highlight so importantly.
No, I got it, man. I think you're doing a great thing with this podcast too. Reaching out and having these conversations. Is that kind of like the conceit of why you started having this podcast with this theme and everything like that, about just reaching out and just having real conversations?
Yeah, it was more like, we walk around each other and we don't even take an hour to get to know one another. Like, you could be a serial killer. I have no clue. I mean, I basically invited you like a stranger would tell a kid to hop in his car if he had candy,
Yeah.
But nowadays you're going to rate that stranger 5 stars because he picked you up. That's your average day Uber. They offer you candy now.
Oh yeah, I don't use Uber. That entire thing freaks me out.
That scares me, just for the concept of now they have an app where you can literally, it's like Uber for a toilet. So they have people that open up their bathroom for you to use the bathroom if you need to, like if you're on a road trip, and you get to rate it like 5 stars if it was a good poop or not. I'm like, what are we doing? What's going on? You're not supposed to let strangers in your house to poop. That's not supposed to happen. What do you mean?
No, you're not. No, you're not.
I thought you were going to say, well, that's a good idea.
No. It all comes down to, like, is your house clean? Are they paying you for it? Like Airbnb, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not the worst idea. There's definitely been worse ideas, of course. Are you in the house? Are your valuables around and stuff like that? But I'm not just gonna open my house and make it like a porta potty. You know what I'm saying? But Uber, yeah, Uber's fucking terrifying, and you hear people getting picked up, and like every once in a while, you hear how people like get killed by their Uber drivers, and it just makes me wonder, like.
Yeah, you're putting your faith.
Yeah, you knew this
somebody you don't even know just because of a picture and a rating that they have on an app. Like, who's to say that they're just not going to take you for a ride, lock the doors, and you're just gone?
Yeah, and that's probably happened, man. That has definitely probably happened.
It's like, hey, that was my street. You're not turning down my street. Where are we going? What's going on? He's just up front. Shut up. Enjoy the ride. Watch Finding Nemo on the TV.
If they have Finding Nemo, that'd be even creepier, man.
Well, I think that'd be a good. Actually, that Uber would probably get 5 stars.
You'd be dead. You couldn't give them 5 stars.
I just want my Uber to be like, "Hey, man, what's up?" And like, yeah, I'm just trying to get to my house. If we can get there kind of as fast as possible. He goes, honestly, dude, you just want to go to a water park? I'm like, what? He's like, do you just want to? I will take you to Red Lobster, and we will have a nice seafood dinner right now. And I'm like, let's go. Let's do this.
No. I would know. No.
What?
Nope. Get me out. No. Out. Go.
Wait, so what are you talking about just because I said Red Lobster? Like if I said somewhere maybe like an Outback or something?
No, man. It would just be like, I don't know, maybe and I think this kind of goes back to the themes you were talking about earlier. Maybe my faith in humanity is just not that high. You know, if some person I've never met before, and this could, like, if a taxi driver said it, I'd have the same feeling. It wouldn't really matter unless I had some semblance of, like, if I knew the person or I knew of the person, right? But if it's just some random person driving me, you know, on an Uber trip, they're like, "Hey, man, I know you want to go home, but I'm going to take you to dinner." I would be like, "Look, man, no."
I mean,
Like,
maybe not forcibly saying, "Hey, let's just do this." Maybe if he was just suggesting, "Would you like to go out to eat?" Like, you would say no to an Uber driver, but I guarantee you, if a cop picked you up while you were hitchhiking and asked if you wanted to stop somewhere to get some food, you would accept it, all because he was wearing a badge.
yeah, absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, it's a concept of authority, right? It's a person in authority. Like, you know, they have state vested powers, they have state vested responsibilities, right? Now, at the end of the day, the cop could be a psychopath too, but there's that respect for authority there, and they're an authority figure. They're hired, you know, they're responsible to the state. They're responsible to the public good. It's the Uber driver that technically they're employed, but it's different, right? Like, if you don't get somewhere, they can say that you got picked up in your Uber, and a story could be made up one way or the other about it. And yeah, same with cops in general. I can understand that idea, especially if, you know, it's not all cops are honest, but I'd rather do it from a cop, especially if I'm hitchhiking, right? He's driving down. Hey, he picks you up. Hey, do you want to get dropped off at a diner? Yeah, sure. Yeah, because I'm going to go to lunch. So I guess it depends on the conversation as well, too, right? If I'm hitchhiking and I get picked up, and in that case, it's anybody, because I'm hitchhiking, I'm pretty much in a bad situation regardless. They say, "Hey, I'll drop you off at this station. You want me to drop you off at the diner or drop you off at a restaurant?" Then I'd probably say sure. But if I have a place to go, like for an Uber driver, then no, I'm not going. If they're offering me to go to Red Lobster or something like that, I'm probably going to have to turn them down. I'd be a little creeped out. I probably want a new driver.
See, I think a lot of people get a bad view on cops just because I think they honestly have a really hard job. It's obviously not for everyone. There's people that break under pressure, but you got to think you're like the president. There's constantly eyes on you 24/7. You know what I mean? It creates so much pressure that I don't think people understand that.
Oh, it certainly creates pressure. You're expected to do something. You're expected to do the right thing all the time, and whenever you don't do the right thing, you are held to a very, very high standard, and the demands of what's going to happen to you are typically higher than what happens to, you know, your average person, right? So, yeah, I can completely. I don't. People don't like cops because cops arrest you when you do bad things, and everyone does bad things. And no one wants to get arrested when they do bad things because they know other people that do bad things and don't get arrested.
Well, no one
So
wants to pay the price anymore.
no, well, I mean, no one ever wanted to pay the price. Let's be real. No, like, I think that's a misconception about the millennials, right, and younger. And I think that's something that's been said for younger generations forever. You know, we have this idea nowadays, and I think it's more pervasive again, going back to technology and everything being out there, and a narrative that's able to be pushed one way or another, that today's generation is somehow the least responsible generation of all time. And you know what? It might be. I don't know. I haven't dug into the dug into the research about it. But when you see that, do people not want to take responsibility? Name me a period in time when people wanted to take responsibility for their actions they're wrong, other than maybe, you know, historical figures, right? I think that's always been the case. You always see cases where people try to get away with murder. You always see cases where people try to get away with theft or petty crime or whatever the case. This isn't a new thing. People, if there's been a way to get away with something, people have always been trying to do it. That's why we have so many court cases in the past from the Supreme Court. That's why we have so many laws that we have made to close loopholes from experiences from the past. It's because people are always going to try and find a way to get out of the dumb shit that they do.
So people are constantly looking for an excuse.
Yeah, I would say that they're, for the most part, right? In general, I wouldn't say not every person is always looking for an excuse in every instance. I would say in general, if people can get an excuse and it'll make their lives easier, then generally that's what they're going to do. Like electricity, you know, it's the path of least resistance is the one that will always be followed.
Ah, okay. You pulled some fortune cookie knowledge out of that. I like it.
Mhm.
I think what we need to kind of pay attention to is the fact that like there used to be stuff back in the day that was taught you life lessons. Okay. Like old TV shows, for example, Johnny Bravo taught you not to be a dick to women because of the concept of they don't like that. You could be
Mhm.
super buff, super handsome, but they overall kind and respect. We don't have those shows anymore. We have stuff where it's just fart jokes and explosions. Yeah, those are fun. And it's really just to pay attention to the new attention span. But like, you know, dive it into kind of what you do for like a podcast. Like you do the retro hangover. So you
Yeah.
talk about like throwbacks to kind of old retro style games and, you know, that's something that was completely lost that I think kind of needs to come back in a way because those types of games were kind of pretty impactful, whether they were really, really good or kind of just basic. But a lot of them taught some concepts, at least when it came to like, I guess this would be a dumb example, but World of Warcraft, for instance, that I still play that today, and only on the concept of it taught me to look through history and see these things that like they involve in the game, such as conjuration, mysticism, mages, knights, paladins, all these things that people chalk up to being a ridiculous gaming thing. I'm like, this has been throughout our history, though. For years, video games have been a bridge to connect, especially older ones. Like I can still connect to my parents over playing an old Super Mario Land or playing something on the Game Boy or Atari. You
Mhm.
know, it was a way of connectivity without such the kind of nonsense violence it seems it is today. Like I do love some of the games today, but they kind of lost the concept of what it really means.
I think video games have lost the concept.
I think it lost kind of the story behind it. You know what I mean? A lot of games back in the day it seemed like they were really, really developed compared to what they are now, where it's just the same thing over and over again, such as like Call of Duty, adding jetpacks, adding these types of things. It seems like it's just becoming the same thing over and over in a different way.
Uh, I got to disagree with you. For video games, right? Now that we're getting to video games, there are a lot of interesting and new concepts, and they're still out there for the most part. You just got to look for them. What you're seeing is major developers are taking less risks because they don't have to take as many risks. So they're going to, especially when games cost so much to develop nowadays. So you look at like Call of Duty, and yeah, you're going to get a lot of Call of Duty, sequels. They're going to re-release Call of Duty every year. Why? Because they know Call of Duty is going to make you money, and Call of Duty is it's going to sell, and they already have the template. They know what's going to make it work. So you go back to the 80s and 90s and the video game era, that era of video games. And you did have a lot of games that were really, really similar. I mean, look how many 2D platformers there are.
Well,
Look how
no,
many fighting games there were.
what I'm saying is old retro games, they did it right on the concept of they might have been similar, but they all had their own unique kind of background to it and their own kind of flair or a little spice to the mix. Like the original Assassin's Creed games. And then they release it every 3 years, only on the concept of they don't want to release a new one every single year because they want to kind of create their own design with it. They want to create their own story. They want to create this alternate history that can truly develop at least the gamer's mind. Back in the day, this used to be like a lot of the stuff. Like this used to be like whether you're playing a game like Duck Hunt or whether you're playing a game, the list goes on. Back in the day, it was more of I guess a kind of enriched concept to it when it came to more of a own originality. Nowadays, it's just the same thing getting repeated over and over and over again because that's what sells. I'm like, you're supposed to take that risk of it not doing well, not playing it safe, and experimenting, going out of your comfort zone.
But you can't you can't do that now. There's if you look at the size of the development teams back then, you had maybe 30 at most. Now you have staffs of hundreds. So when you say you got to take that risk, you got to be prepared to fail. Maybe a company like Activision can afford to do that, right? Maybe a company like Electronic Arts can afford to do that. But you look at a lot of the companies back then that were doing it, and you did have some big money. You'd have some big money companies, but it didn't cost as much to take a risk. So you could. Like they didn't have billions and billions like they do now. So Activision now, yeah, maybe they can afford to take one, and then they lose $500 million. But they're like, yeah, we can't do that franchise anymore, but we're going to make our money in Call of Duty. So they'll always have their one little offshoots, and then they'll go away. Like Electronic Arts, And games like Dead Space, people love Dead Space, but they're not making any more Dead Space because it didn't sell enough. Even though Dead Space 3 probably sold a couple million units right off the shelf. So they sold
That's
their millions of units.
that's still a small number compared to most other video games and other things that they create
Yeah.
too.
But that's the problem. You could sell 2 million copies of a video game and still not make enough money to recoup the cost of development. Or to, like back in the day, if I could sell a million copies of, I don't know, The Legend of Zelda, and my development team was 20 people, I just made a ton of money. I've just made $60 million gross. I think that's gross net. In any case, so I made $60 million gross pay before I factor in how much I got to pay my employees, how much I got to pay for the building, how much I got to pay for everything else. So there's a lot more to it. Like the media, the growth of the video game media has kind of led to the fact that you get a lot less unique video games nowadays. But you still do get them in the indie scene. And that's why if you look at the indie scene, you do see a lot of fleshed out, interesting video games. But you also have the double-edged sword of the indie scene. Just it's gotten to the point too with the indie scene where if it's indie, it has to be good. When you have a lot of crap from the indie scene out there right now as well. So you do get the spice. The spice is there. It's in the indie scene. It's not with the major companies. But the major companies aren't going to do anything because they just have too many employees they got to stand by. They have their shareholders they got to stand by. So the risks aren't going to be there like it was in the past. So yeah, it's way different. I completely understand, the nostalgia you would have for that era. And that's why we do the podcast, is because, me and my fellow podcaster, Shane, we look back at that era and we see a very good time in video games that we like to reminisce about.
What are your favorite moments, I would say, that kind of hooked you and even decided to get you into doing at least a podcast about retro games?
Why do we do a podcast? Are you looking just for my favorite moments of
Yeah,
video
like
games?
being a kid and playing a game. I remember I would call out of school, I would fake be sick, and I would play the Nintendo 64, play Donkey Kong, and I remember how pissed off I used to get when it said that there was no cartridge inside of it. And I was like, what are you talking about? There's it right here. And I'm sitting there jamming it inside of the Nintendo 64. I don't think kids nowadays understand the struggle of trying to fix your memory card by blowing into it and then putting it in and seeing the screen light up. That doesn't happen nowadays. And those are some of the moments I look back on. I'm like, that's why I went and bought a Nintendo 64 at a thrift store for $5. It was a steal. And I'm like, I'm playing it now. I'm like, this is so different from the games I play now. I mean, I barely play games as it is, but just trying to come from playing Xbox One games with the 4K to playing an old school game, you're sitting there like, how did I love this so much as a kid? But then you start playing it and getting wrapped into the kind of the story and the basics you start getting a nostalgia effect that boosts you to even play it even more.
So the thing that causes me is to stick with these older games is that the games, when you go back to the PlayStation 2 era, Xbox era, and before that, you have complete games. You don't need a day one patch. The game that you're going to play is the game that you're going to get. There's nothing's going to be, plenty can be wrong with it, but for the most part, there was a sense of completion for the game you bought. So there are games like you can buy right now for like the Xbox 360 and PS3 or even PS4 that if you don't have an internet connection, you're not going to be able to play it right. In fact, there's some Switch games you look at that say internet required to download the rest of the game. You go back, if I grab a game, any of my Sega Genesis games, plop it in the Sega Genesis and turn it on, that game's going to be complete. It's not designed to hook up to the internet.
There's no fucking add-on fees.
Nope.
It's like when I play the game, it's like, oh, you can play this, but you get this concept, but you have to pay $6.99 for this, and then you have to pay $8.99 for that, and then you have to pay 20 something for that, and then you get a membership, and then you get the DLC content. I'm like, what happens to just buying the game? What happens to I could just buy the game and play it and take it back? There used to be a risk as a kid going to Blockbuster or some type of game rental or movie rental place and getting a game and not knowing what it was, not knowing what the hell is going to happen, just seeing the pictures on the front and the back, and then playing it. And then after 20 minutes, realizing I made the worst decision of my life. I've had those moments, but I couldn't return it. I sat there and I toughed it out, and it was like eating your vegetables. You had to do it. And nowadays, it's like, nope, we can just go to something else. Xbox now, they sell games on a marketplace, so you don't even have to leave the house. You don't have to go to GameStop and deal with the sketchy employees there. You don't have to do that anymore.
First of all, most of my experiences with GameStop, I like the GameStop employees. I think the GameStop employees are the ones I've ran into anyway. They're top guys.
My friends are GameStop employees, so they're sketchy people. I know that for a fact. Just to the concept of, I remember buying a game, going home, unwrapping it, like I pre-ordered it and everything, unwrapping it, taking a little plastic foil off, taking the stickers off, making sure I did it extra careful so I didn't scratch up the front cover, and then opening it up. There was no disc inside.
Huh.
Yeah, it had plastic on it, and there was no disc inside.
That's nuts.
Explain that to me. And I came back to the store. I was like, what happened? And they're like, oh, you must have got some bum copy. I'm like, you just sold me an empty box. It's like if I order a TV or a phone off Amazon and I get 2 bricks when I open it up. Like I had to drive all the way back 15 minutes. And then I got the stuff. And then they forgot my DLC content and all my online content card that goes inside of it. And I'm like, oh, my God. And I had to go all the way back. Dude, the GameStop experience, it feels like every time I go in there, they're just asking me what I want to pre-order. And that's what they do their sales off of now. That's what gets them numbers. You don't get hours unless you're able to sell a certain amount of pre-orders.
Yeah. But I mean, just going back to the not having to go to GameStop and having that regret, I think the digital age has that though too. Could you imagine just logging onto like Steam or going on the Xbox Marketplace and buying a terrible game for $20?
Yeah, Farming Simulator is $90 on Xbox Marketplace, which does not make sense to me because I played Farming Simulator and it's not fun. Rather just go actually farm.
Well, I think it's a little bit more fun than farming. I don't know. Maybe
man.
you like
Let me tell you something. That Farming Simulator is complicated as hell. You have to get inside and hit a bunch of buttons on a tractor, and then you have to do something a certain way. My buddy's an actual farmer, and he's like, "This is harder than actually farming." At least I know the concept. This is just ridiculous, but he still plays it constantly, which I don't understand. It's like you have farming in your everyday life, and you want to play it as a video game. His life is farming.
But see, that's the thing. So if you spent $90 on Farming Simulator and you don't like it and you got a digital copy of it, you got it in the digital marketplace and you don't like it, you can't return that. You can't take it back. Now, like I understand like Steam has some things that if you haven't played it, so many hours within a certain time limit, you can turn it back into them at any point. But like, let's say you go over that time limit, you're like, it's like the time limit is like 2 or 3 hours, you make it to hour 4 and you're like, wow, this is fucking shit. This is terrible. And you can't take that back. Where with physical game copies, you can still do that. You might not get all your money back.
You're not going to get any money back. You buy a game for $60. I'm here to return this. I can give you $4.95. Bro, I was here an hour ago. It's like, yeah, it dropped in price since you left. I'm like, what? Okay. Like, did you hear about what happened with Kingdom Hearts 3 when it came out? They something happened where I guess they messed up and they I guess there was like a giant like I forgot what it was. It was a type of like a glitch in the original copies that were released, and they actually pulled them off all the shelves. So anybody that bought a Kingdom Hearts 3 copy, like it dropped down to $20 on GameStop's website. I heard that. I was like, that's ridiculous considering how much it was, like $80, $90. People were pre-ordering it. And they kind of lost the concept. Like what fascinated me about Kingdom Hearts was it involved the Disney universe. And like you can go into these alternate kind of parallel, I guess, universes. Like you get to work with Jack Skellington, from Nightmare Before Christmas. You get to deal with like nowadays you're dealing with like Goofy, you're dealing with the Monsters Incorporated people. It was a type of commodity that attached movies and video games all into one section.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it was just a bunch of people kind of complaining because they're like, wait a minute, we're supposed to be working with these people that are involved in our movies, like do this type of thing. And there were just these major glitches. It's like when Fallout 74 came out.
76.
There was a bunch of glitches and things where people are like, this is crap. The multiplayer doesn't work. And they had to keep updating. That's what I find is weird nowadays. Like we have these old school games you used to play, where if there was a glitch, that was just in there. That was just the thing. You kind of had to work around it. You had to make sure the game didn't freeze, or the Xbox, whatever, didn't freeze. Nowadays, they just do an online update and it updates the game.
Oh yeah.
Like, coming from a retro perspective, how do you think about that? I think that's actually pretty cool.
Oh yeah, I mean, but again, I mean, that's kind of the problem too, right? So like a lot of developers, especially like Electronic Arts, the bigger ones, Ubisoft, they get accused of rushing out a product to market, and just because they can say, well, we can fix this later. Like you look at games like No Man's Sky and going back to Fallout 76, and those games come out and they say, well, eventually it's going to be good. Or Skyrim's another one. All of the Elder Scroll games, like, yeah, there's a lot of problems when we launched it, but we're going to patch it. Eventually it's going to be a good game.
Dude, the best part about Oblivion was playing, like, you could duplicate shit. You could do a bunch of stuff that you weren't able to do. And they kept doing patches and stuff that kept fixing it, and people trying to find a way around it. I was like, look, I don't want it to be super difficult. I just want to be able to slice a pumpkin midair and have a million of them pop.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, that'd be cool. But patching stuff's cool, right? Because, you know, you do run those situations where, oh, you know, like, oh shit, this is really broken. We need to fix this game. And so you can do it. And that was really great in the early eras of modern gaming, like when you got to the 360 and PS3. There's an issue with the game, you can patch it, and that's great. It just can't be the expectation. I think developers have started making that the expectation, where almost every game that comes out now has a day one patch to fix issues they discovered before it got to market.
That's actually,
you didn't have that.
That's a pretty interesting thought. If you think of, are they just trying to reach a deadline, like trying to stay in the public eye as much as possible?
Well, yeah, because video games is a multi-billion-dollar market now. They have shareholders. You know, companies have stock. It's publicly available. They have a lot of shareholders. They're making a lot of money. You know, they're high rollers now. They weren't high rollers in 1990. They weren't high rollers in 1995. Now all eyes are on them. So when they say a game is going to come out, you know, Q3 2020, that game's coming out Q3 2020, especially if it's a MMO, you know, what they call online services now, because they figure, yeah, I mean, there might not be anything when we put this game out, but as long as we tell the consumer that things will eventually be there, they'll sign up and they'll pay us $15 a month to do it after paying $60 for the experience anyway.
Do you think kind of video games are going to kind of keep, I guess, would you say, turn into all virtual reality, or do you think there'd still be the original disc kind of game controller type games?
I think there's always going to be a place in video games to use the controller. I think it's just, you know, ubiquitous with playing games for the most part. Virtual reality, it's come a long way. It's fun. I've played a little bit of it, but I just don't think everyone's there yet. I think it's going to take a new generation of gamers to adopt it and move on. Like my generation of people playing video games is never going to fully adopt virtual reality when it comes out. I just don't see that happening, at least as a method to play video games, right? Because video games are still something you play with a controller. Video games are still something you put on a TV. Video games are still something you can sit in a room and do with other people. Like, we remember those days.
Well, we remember the days where it gave you a warning when you played the game saying this may cause seizures. Nowadays, you got virtual reality. It's surrounding your whole vision, and sometimes you have to put on headphones, and it immerses you in all these flashy lights and everything like that. I'm like, that was what they were warning us about as a kid. Like, I remember playing for too long one time to the point where I ended up having to back away, and like my vision had to slowly come back to me. Like, you used to get migraines from playing video games. Now people are just immersing themselves so much into virtual reality. I consider what makes video games so fascinating is it's a way of kind of escaping reality for a little bit. You know, this life is not honestly the best because of what we do to it. You know, we choose to be disconnected from people because that fear of connection is kind of hard to, I guess, deal with, because so many times it's just people complaining about what they don't have rather than enjoying what they do.
But I mean, you'll see a lot of games that have brought people together. Like if you look back at the N64 era that you brought up, and you had those wrestling games like WCW versus NWO, and Smash Brothers is one that people still play together today. And They have tournaments all over. People still play them together.
My buddy has parties at his house where there's just 12 of them playing Smash Brothers. Like everybody takes turns and stuff. I mean, those are probably some of my funnest nights. I mean, I think it's awesome the way it's connected us. Like I have a buddy that I've been best friends with for 9 years over Xbox Live. He actually was on my first episode of my second season of my podcast, and we've never met. He lives out in Wisconsin, but I have his text. I have his phone number. I have his Facebook, I have his Instagram, I have his Snapchat. I've known him for 8 years now, and he invited me to his wedding coming up. So it's like, it's a way to connect people too. But I feel like where we take it nowadays, like you're seeing, multiplayer games are pretty awesome, but no one wants to deal with the struggle of trying to argue with someone and get frustrated over just another person complaining or just trying to piss somebody off.
Right. Well, you can always disconnect in that case, just turn it off. Whereas you can't do that if they're in the room. If someone wants to throw a controller around and get angry about something, you really can't get away from that. But it's also a life lesson. Is sometimes you're going to make people irrationally angry, and you're going to have to know how to deal with it, I guess.
Some kid's gonna call your mom a whore, and you have to problem solve. Do you call him a whore back, or do you just choose to ignore it and see if that kid keeps on going into the point where you throw your Xbox out the window? I mean, I think the problem, like a lot of people link video games to violence. I kind of want to get your advice on this, just because being, I guess, a father and also kind of seeing the world of video games transform. Do you think that's true, that video games cause violence?
No.
I don't think so either, because a lot of people chalk up like, oh, he plays a violent video game, that's why he shot up the store. I was like, look, I run over hookers in Grand Theft Auto all the time, and I don't feel like doing that in my everyday life.
I mean, they've done studies on it before. Video games, it's shown video games are not a direct cause of violence. Do I think they can desensitize people to violence? Sure, just much like movies and other forms of media can do that. All sorts of media, no matter what you ingest, you're going to conform or be desensitized to the kind of things you see within that media format, no matter what those themes are. Yeah, but it's not going to cause you to go out and kill people.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to say nowadays, but I feel like with media being such a huge influence, we're very, very numb to the fact that a shooting happens nowadays. Like people just kind of turn off the television and just go about their day. Like, oh, another shooting happened. That's a major thing we need to kind of look at in ourselves. Like it's basically getting shoved in our face too much to the point where we're just like, it always happens, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely think that's something we need to find out why it happens. People want to focus on guns, and they want to have gun bans, and they think guns are bad, even though they know nothing about guns. But it's not like guns should be like you should have fully automatic weapons running around with those either. I'm not trying to say that, but I think there is a lot of things we need to look into and what's causing these shootings. Certainly, all I know for certain is it's not video games. I know they're getting more and more realistic. Well, I would say it probably has something to do with the fact that we are very disconnected, going back to the beginning of our conversation, as a society, and we are desensitized to things like violence. So you look at a lot of parenting nowadays, and kids don't go outside like they used to. I can vouch for that, because when I was a kid, I used to go outside all the time. You walk around any neighborhood nowadays, you just don't see kids playing outside. You do see a lot younger people just being absorbed by digital entertainment. They don't entertain themselves by going out and being physically active as much as they used to, or at all. So I think there is that, and it's the lack of human connection. It's the way we feel validated by other people, which nowadays is a lot of social media interaction with Twitter and Facebook and other social media things, where it's about getting the likes, it's about getting approval from your virtual friends, and I think that can be very damaging on the psyche. And I think if people are conditioned to live like that, you're going to get results that aren't necessarily going to be the same as they had been in the past. Something's going to change. Things are going to be altered. And what changes and what's altered and how people interact and behave, people who don't grow up conditioned to be in that environment are not going to understand it. And they're the ones that usually are tasked to finding a response or finding the solution to it, at least initially. So yeah, we live in an interesting time.
So being a dad, like seeing kind of your kids growing up, like, do you have kind of a fear of where technology is going in the aspect of that? Just being a father in general?
I certainly do. I don't. like I know my kids right now, like they're 13, 11. I know a lot of kids their age do have social media accounts. We've tried to do our best to make sure our kids don't have social media accounts. You know, no Facebook, no Snapchat, no Instagram, no nothing like that. Just because the primary focus should be staying in school. Um, but they do need to get adapted with technology because that's the future when it comes to getting a job. That's how to be employable.
That's how it used to be, though. Now you're seeing kids that are getting paid to play Fortnite. The kid that won just like $2 million or something like that, and now they're going to add video games into the Olympics.
But it's such a minority of the population. Like you're talking, so few people are making an actual living off playing video games in relation to the rest of the public. At the end of the day, your average person is going to have to go out there and find a job. They're going to have to get an education. They're going to have to learn a trade. And they're going to have to apply that. And playing Fortnite isn't, for most people, the large overwhelming majority of people, is not going to pay the bills, right? You might have a couple thousand here or there that are going to make some cheddar at the end of the month, maybe a couple $100, but it's not going to be enough to get, a nice house, have a nice family, everything like that. Like they need to focus on those skills and those aspects and that method of life.
Yeah, it's crazy because you look at the concept of just how many people wanted to be a famous rapper, so they started becoming rappers. Like they wanted to make mixtapes. They wanted to make this dope fire record that's going to blow up your car when you put it in the stereo. Now you're hearing things about these gamers that are getting paid to play video games. Now it seems like every kid wants to be a Twitch streamer. They want to go something. They want to go live on YouTube. They want people to watch them play video games, and it is pretty popular on YouTube. But it's the concept of like we invest into something that is just like a trend. You know what I mean? Where that's not always going to be the same thing over and over and over again.
But they could have good side effects, right? So just like anything where you see people making money, where it's an overwhelming minority of the people making money in a giant field. So you think like how many people in the world play soccer or football or basketball, and how many people want to be professionals in those sports? I'm sure like a lot of people do. So it's just like, but so few people are actually going to be able to make it and be able to make a real living doing those kind of things. So what you see is when you have someone, you create a goal and you say, this is what I want to do. And even if they can't make it there, what they do learn is if you have a goal, you get a mindset that you have to dedicate yourself to something. You have to work towards doing that thing, and you have to put your mind to it, structure it, and nothing is necessarily going to come as easy as you think it will. Now, for some people, yeah, it does come easy, but not for everybody. So a lot of people have to learn that. And sometimes it's going after those goals that just aren't attainable, unfortunately. Like, I want to be a pro Fortnite player. How do I do that? Well, I got to play Fortnite a lot, and I got to practice a lot. I have to dedicate myself, make a schedule, and organize myself to play Fortnite enough in order to be good at it. And then I have to find a way to advertise myself through Twitch or through other methods. So it does teach you other things that you can do. It gets you into the social media sphere. It teaches you how to produce video. It teaches you how to mix audio quality. It teaches you how to do all these other things that you're doing in pursuit of your goal to be a Fortnite streamer or a YouTube star. So now you have other skills in addition to doing something else because you put your hard work into something else, and you can do them, and you probably enjoy doing them, or you wouldn't continue to do them in the first place. So it's not a total net loss.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you were, you wanted to be, a good actor, you would go into everything that involved acting. You would start learning, doing the research behind it, getting all the background information, seeing where it started. Also going on, like if you want to be a comedian, you got to go on stage. It's just taken to a new form. Now it's just the concept, even to like my grandparents, it's hard for them to understand where playing video games can be a job. They didn't have that back then. They didn't have something of this sort. So getting their minds to boggle around that, it's different. And it's a little bit different for me too, because I do see a benefit, like watching my cousin play Minecraft, like the things he can build, that's amazing. And then now he does graphic design only at the age of 13, where he's creating these own things using Pixel Art Studio. And I'm like, I've seen his brain capacity for it just take off in a whole new direction. But his parents don't know how to like deal with that. Like half the time they just give him a tablet and he lets it play it at the dinner table. There's still not those connective moments that I think a kid does still need.
Well, that's like we had Lego. But that's the thing. I mean, you develop your skills from the things you do. You can find interest from the things you do. And that's a very exciting thing. And that's why we still, you can't look down on a hobby. No matter what happens with generations, if you can get paid for playing video games, good. There's probably an entire different thing that either my kids or their kids' generation will do that I will not completely understand why they're doing it and how they're making money doing it. But that's how the world works. If you create a product and it's in demand, then that product will generally be successful.
Yeah, I think like if I was going to ask you, what is one specific game back, at least in the retro era, like that kind of you focus on? What is one game that really impacted or changed kind of your mind in your life a little bit? Because I think we all have one game that stands out, maybe have changed us who we are as a person. For me, will be the concept of maybe some game like Oblivion or Skyrim, only on the concept of it didn't really teach a life lesson, but it taught me to do more research as a person into historical things.
See, for me, that's hard because from a pure entertainment standpoint, like my favorite game is just like Streets of Rage 2. You walk around and just beat people up. I mean,
That's
not
how you
like
kind of problem solve when a person confronts you.
just punch them and do an uppercut.
When they cut in front of you in 12 items or less, you're basically going to you're gonna beat them up. You're gonna Mortal Kombat his ass.
Mm-hmm. Like just kind of the cool aspects. I think there's just aspects of everything. Like games could have story or an interesting story. I think like Metal Gear Solid was a game that really had that kind of impact on me. It shows that games were something more than just what they were. And I had games like that prior to it, like Final Fantasy VI, but it was mostly Metal Gear Solid that did that. And then the game that really showed that games could be art, and that was Shadow of the Colossus. And that was one of those games that showed, the beauty of the message that a game could transpire and how uniquely a game could do that, as opposed to other forms of media, because you are Wander, you are the device that is killing these colossi, and the end result is a big question of, was all of this worth it? And it has a lot of moral and ethical questions if you're paying attention to the nature of the game as to whether or not you're doing the right thing. And that's one of the great moments of video gaming for me. Now, did it have a profound impact on my life? I don't think so. But did it have me have a different view on what art is, what art can be, and how art can be accomplished? Certainly. And it made me appreciate the medium even more.
Well, Chris, dude, it's been awesome talking to you, man. I want to give you a minute at the end here to be able to plug your podcast so people can find it when we release the episode.
Awesome. So once again, I am Chris Coplien, and I am one member of the Retro member of the Retro Hangover podcast. I do it with my buddy Shane. You can find us on the internet on Instagram at Retro Hangover, on Twitch. I think we're Retro Hangover podcast. I mean, yeah, we are on Twitch. We're Retro Hangover on Twitch, and we do Sunday streams every Sunday from 9 to 11. You can find us on Twitter. Just look up Retro Hangover. You can find us. I'm not sure the exact name, and on our Facebook as well. You can also find me on my Instagram. I'm at Zodiac, which is XODYAK. Feel free to follow me there and contact me there as well. And, we are always looking to engage with listeners or just people on the internet and talk video games. So I'd love to see you there.